Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uppercut's first ever PAX West panel. This isn't quite how we thought it would be. It's a little different this year, but nevertheless, we are so incredibly excited to be here. We're passionate about the topic. We have some amazing guests who have come from all sorts of time zones to be here and to do this with us. So it's really cool. We're gonna jump right into the introductions because some really cool people I'm excited for you guys to get to know. The first person that we're going to go to is the editor-in-chief of Uppercut, one of my good friends, Tanya X. And the way that we're going to do this is I'm just going to let everybody kind of introduce themselves, talk about whatever projects they want to mention, and yeah, and just kind of talk about themselves. So Ty, tell me a little bit about yourself.
As just said, I'm Ty. I am Uppercut editor-in-chief. I am also a freelance writer around the old Webberoonie, and I use they, them pronouns, and the mother from Dragon Age Origins Awakening is my wife.
Yes, I feel like the mother thing is definitely the point to drive home. That's
It just feels relevant to the conversation.
no, it is. Monty, you're up next. Monty's also from Uppercut. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? I keep wanting to say yourselves. I did this earlier too.
Just
Yourself.
all of us.
Oh
We
yeah,
just have a lot of like within ourselves. It
the
makes sense.
many personalities of Uppercut.
So yeah, I'm Monty. I am the editor at large over at Uppercut. You'll see me kind of write about my culture, my past with video games, how I love and hate them now. It's great. And yeah, you can catch me just taking pictures of Rusty all the time.
It's true.
Next up, we have Jeffrey Rousseau. Jeffrey, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to offer an intelligent perspective as a man who understands. Oh, there's a lot of problems out here for things that cater to me,
There you go.
quote unquote. Um, but my name is Jeffrey Russo. I am a journalist and critic. I'm also a freelance writer. I like to write a lot about how games still aren't really for black and brown folks, which is really weird in the year 2020, and a whole bunch of other things. And I love RPGs. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here. Yeah, we're really excited to have you on, and thank you so much for joining us. The next person that we're gonna go to is Zwenha Yang, but you go by Z.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So we have Z here with us, and Z, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Z. I am the founder, executive producer, and narrative director at Serenity Forge. We do mostly narrative, kind of artsy-fartsy games as a studio. Some in the sense of romance, we launched a game called Half Past Fate earlier this year, and we just announced two new games. Land of Screens and Date Night Bowling that about a week or 2 weeks ago, depending on when this thing goes live. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I like to do kind of non-traditional narrative when it comes to video games, but not necessarily like non-traditional in the grand scheme of things. I feel like there's a lot of things that like when the video game industry was established, there's just like a group of men that have like decided that this is what games should be about. And like it kind of just barred everyone else out from it, right? So the games that we make are pretty like honestly pretty like easy to digest. But ultimately like they're not really well known or seen in the industry itself. So yeah, glad to be here.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you. And I mean, Half Past Fate, that was like how we met, and that was such a fun game. I loved it. I played it earlier this year, like right when it came out, and it's so cute. I love all of the stories, all the characters. So thank you for being here, and
Yeah,
I'm
thank
really
you.
glad to have you here. And last but certainly not least, we have Tanya X Short. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excellent. I'm excited to start this discourse or whatever this is going to be about romance and games. I'm Tanya. I'm a game designer. I've been a professional salaried game designer now for over 10 years, and it's a volunteer community slash volunteer / various other journalists and whatever before that. But the last 7 years, I've been primarily known as the captain of Kitfox Games, which is a small independent studio in Montreal. So I'm designer and producer and lead stuff. And we are most known right now for Boyfriend Dungeon. Actually, very soon we'll be releasing another game called Lucifer Within Us. You could pretend there's some romance in there, but if you if you want romance that's actually supported by the content of the game, that would be Boyfriend Dungeon, which does not have an announced date yet, but you might have seen on Kickstarter and that kind of thing. And I've always had an abiding interest in relationships and dialogue systems, and so sometimes that overlaps into romance. There's a couple of romantic threads in our past game, Moon Hunters, for example. But yeah, I'll probably mostly be talking about Boyfriend Dungeon since that's my main experience with creating dating simulators.
Perfect.
Where you date your weapons, to be clear. If no one's heard of Boyfriend Dungeon, please go wishlist it now, because those weapons got to get dated.
They're called like Beyblades, aren't they?
They are.
It's so good. So good. I think that all of us at Uppercut, we all played Boyfriend Dungeon. At least, like, I played it at PAX East. I think
Victoria got tired of seeing me, honestly, because like PAX East and then PAX West, I was like, "Hey, I'm back. It's me again."
Round 2. Let's go.
She never gets tired of talking to press ever.
But no, and that game is going to be so good. I'm so excited for it. So thank you so much for coming here. It's awesome. Like I said, I'm really happy that we managed to get everybody who is on this panel. Really great voices, great people, and it's going to be a great conversation. And so I guess where we want to begin, where I thought would be the natural place to begin, is kind of our history with romantic games, with games that are rooted in relationships or love or sex. And we can kind of, I can either call on somebody or we can just kind of like bounce back and forth off each other, which seems probably more natural. So we can just do one of those. And yeah, I just want to talk about our first experiences and like kind of, I guess, the feelings that inspired in us and made us want to delve into it deeper. Monty, you want to start off?
I do.
I know.
I'm
I know you're
very
excited about it.
Okay. So my background and context. So I grew up in a very strict Latin home, and kind of coming from an immigrant family, we kind of have the mindset of just like their sex, love, and anything with like the opposite sex, because Latin culture has a lot of ingrained homophobia, and they don't believe, same sex, that doesn't exist when you're younger. That nothing of that exists when you're 18, until you're 18. And because I was kind of really sheltered, I only had the internet to kind of go for, which is, I don't think, the best experience to kind of, go about relationships and love. You'd catch me at like the library, like on YouTube, like typing girls kissing, because it's the only way that I could have gone to see that. But my first kind of experience with a relationship in a video game would have to be a not so good kind of novel called Katawa Shoujo. And that was a big thing like in the late 2000s. You were kind of in relationships with girls who, with all the issues that happened to them, are still going and are still kind of living their lives. It was very heartbreaking, but a lot of the elements into that story were super problematic. Now kind of going back to it when I was like, I think 19, it was not a good game to play when I was 11 years old. And yeah, that's my first kind of relationship game that I played.
I was the same way. I think that the first, like, I don't know. I mean, you grow up and you realize, like, looking back at, the games you played, like, kind of there's that like heteronormative agenda in there. Like, I mean, even like something like Ocarina of Time, right? The game starts off with Zelda being captured, and your entire game is like, getting a girl, right?
It was really weird. It was definitely had those elements, and also like the whole like savior like complex in that game was also really bad too. I don't recommend people play it, but definitely, I don't know if anyone else had like an experience like that with their first game, because I know I would not let anyone play that now.
Yeah, well, and that's I was gonna like the next thing, like the explicit romance games I played were like all things on Newgrounds, which that's just like when you look back at that and you think I played those Flash games, it's kind of, you know, just makes you think, you're like, what like weird messages did I pick up doing that about women? You know? But
The Naruto Newgrounds, like relationship ones were fire though.
yeah.
They got me going. Yeah, they were great.
Who'd you go for, huh?
I went for Sasuke because I have bad taste.
But yeah, I don't know. I like I said, Newgrounds for me was like a place where I don't know, I was introduced to like explicit material and sex and games and things like that in that extreme of a regard, I guess. Because I mean, outside of that, you know, like one of the first games that I ever loved was like Final Fantasy VII, and that was the first game I ever played that had like this really strong narrative and characters and like relationships between them, and it was like, you know, you had that love triangle in there, like Aerith or Tifa, you know, and so like that to me made me feel like, oh wow, games can be like this. Like games aren't just like you jump and hit the thing and then you run. It was like you can have like characters and relationships and all of this, and that was mind blowing when I was, you know, 7 years old or whatever. So
yeah, I think one of my first video game crushes was definitely Eris and Tifa. But I was realizing when you asked me the question that one of my very, very first crushes was actually on a character that I couldn't date at all, which is in Link's Awakening, the original on the Game Boy. I was a very young child, but Marin was so sweet, and she would do this little song, da da da. And I don't know, there was just something about that I was like, I want to be with her forever. I just want to hold her hand, and it's me and Marin. And it wasn't till some years later that I was like, oh, that means we can be best friends. It's okay, Tanya. Like, you don't have to, just because you play video games doesn't mean like you have to date all the girls. It turns out later, playing the reboot, I learned that apparently there is romance shoehorned in there that doesn't make any sense unless you're a young child that thinks all boys and girls have to date at some point.
yeah.
But my first explicit experiences, I'm gonna start blushing. I swear. It was actually multiplayer games. I mean, I'm older than most of you, I think. So mine were text only multiplayer games, but in some ways that made them more explicit. In fact, this is so. It's a sign of the times, but I was this, you know, 13, 14-year-old, like, thinking I was cyber sexing with the characters from like Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time or whatever, and I'm like being so sexy. And I found out later, like years later, that my like online role play boyfriend, whoever, had been showing my text to his friends and laughing about it because it made no sense, because I had no idea what I was typing really. And so that was like a very early introduction to like, boys are not always so nice. But that's something that video games probably shouldn't teach you either. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, wow. That's actually kind of like terrifying, honestly. Like you're laughing about it now. When I'm hearing that, that's like, you know, like To Catch a Predator is like literally made for that, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't.
I'm really glad that I'm 90% sure that the boys I was talking to were actually like 15. Like I don't think that I was being predated. But I think the part of the problem was up till that point I had been, you know, conducting myself as if I was like 20, and then as soon as it's like sexy times, it's like lightning and body parts.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I played my fair of like early like MMOs and stuff like that. Like RuneScape was a really big thing, you know, probably in our age group. And yeah, there were some questionable choices that I definitely made as a middle schooler on there. But I think, you know, that this question really got me thinking a lot. And I started just digging deeper and deeper into my vault, you know, like you start unlocking things more and more. And I think I'd finally traced it to a video game that I played. So there's some context. So I was born in China. I'm a first generation immigrant here in the US. So I was, you know, I grew up in China, played a lot of these Chinese, Japanese only games. And at the time, we didn't have, a video game console access or anything. So I played a lot of PC games, primarily MS-DOS games. So one of the companies that I loved was Koei, before Koei and Tecmo merged into their new thing now. And in the early days of Koei, they made a lot of these games that are like historical simulations and like really crazy strategy games like Nobunaga's Ambition, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, these types of games. And I remember there was this one game that I played. It was called Genghis Khan, I believe. And it's about Chinese, Mongolian, ancient history. Really, like the two of them are kind of similar. And you play as like either Genghis Khan or some kind of state lord in that Warring States period. And it's all about strategy, like a typical like Nobunaga's Ambition type of strategy game. However, there is a particular game system in that game where, like, again, some context here, like during that Warring State period, a lot of the socioeconomic and political kind of struggles that people have, it has to do with, like who you're marrying, whether or not your concubine had a child, or if your empress had a child, whether or not this child is being brought up, like whether or not she has favors, like all that stuff. So that ended up being a huge game system where, like, the fertility of your wife or like your concubine is like part of the game's mechanics, and you have to like manage like whether or not you can convince this woman who has like higher fertility to have sex with you so that you can have a stronger like child to take over for you after you're dead, so that you can like rule the world. And it was graphical as well. Like I was like 7 years old playing this game, and it was like graphical, and you have to like try to like, so like I have a huge love and hate relationship with this game, which is why I kind of like locked it away in my head. I realized that at the time I was like, sex, like I was a 7-year-old boy, like I was cool. But then like later on in life, I was like, that's actually kind of gross. Like you're like objectifying, like literally, it's a game system, right? Like you're taking women as a tool.
Crusader Kings 2, also similarly like historical.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so like, yeah, like I really hated the game for a while. But like looking back at it today, I'm 30 years old now, and like looking at my childhood now, like I do appreciate the certain historical accuracy of this game, because I do think it's way more focused on the actual accuracy. Like they were really like going hardcore on simulation, because making these choices on like which fertile women you should have sex with is like literally a political choice back then. Compared to now, where like we look at it and it could be seen as extremely misogynistic, which it is, but like like it like back then I can kind of see that. So yeah, I mean, I guess like at 7 years old, I was playing this game, making choices on getting women fertile. That was my exposure to what sex was.
Gotta get that good fertility RNG.
Yeah, right. Those big hips.
And that's the opposite of the effect of porn games, right?
Oh my god.
Fertility RNG is not something that I thought would be said.
Right.
But here we are.
I'm trying to think. I think Z's thing kind of reminded me. I think the first time I saw sex in games was the God of War thing. Where like if you do it right, you get a bunch of red orbs, which is confusing because normally you get those for killing people. So I was like, I don't really understand why they're also like a byproduct of sex, but whatever, that's fine. That game is deeply misogynistic towards women. Yeah, and then I think, well, too, okay, the Dark Sorceress and Battletoads did make me gay when I was 5. So there's that. I've had the same exact type since I like had a single brain cell in my head, and it's that. So, yeah, but I think like I'm definitely also a BioWare gay, so I think my first like romances in games were like probably Fable, and then like Skyrim, and then Dragon Age. And I was like, oh, like when you romance them, they stay people. Okay, cool, sick, because they don't in Skyrim at all. So.
And how about you, Jeffrey?
While everyone was explaining everything, I was thinking back to my younger days, and it was all like very kosher up until middle school, because it's then while everyone's talking about explicit games, and then that's when those came around and everyone was big into pirating. But before that, it was like, Zelda, when I would play like Legend of Zelda, I was thinking like, okay, why does everyone like Link where he's just doing his job. I don't think he's a really good person, but then again, he's not really talking to defend himself either. So I guess, I don't know. They all seem cool. I don't know why they're talking to you. So in my head, it's like mainly at that point, I'm seeing romance from like sitcoms, and of course, we all know when you look back and you think about that, those are very problematic. But at the same time, as I'm playing like Legend of Zelda, and I'm looking at these very misogynistic views of like what romance is, and you know, you're actually talking to people and you know, young women around your age group, you realize, wow, no, this is not how this works at all. I'm surprised that no one ran away from me because I said some very weird things. But yeah, it'd be weird when you're in high school, your friend like, hey yo, check out this hentai game or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm playing it. And I'm like, that's not how that works because I actually talk to women. So it was very, the disconnect was profuse, and then you're realizing the male gaze is very, very cringy and oh god. But as far as real romance in the games, I want to say when I started playing the Persona games is when I really started thinking about it, and even those are problematic, and I know that's a whole another thing we can get into. But that's when I really started to think about like the mechanics and how when everything is designed from a male's perspective, and let's be honest, they are for those games as far as romance are concerned, because you can't be a friend with a woman. I don't know why that exists. Platonic relationships are a thing. You start to realize the disconnect is it's a problem. It's toxic, really. And this whole fantasy thing that we all perpetuate, if you don't stop and just really think about how you're, you know, absorbing everything like that, it could skew your views about how things should work.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I feel like a lot of the problem, we could actually talk about the fantasy of romance is sort of the core of the problem, because you know, we're used to, as game designers, like we're used to fulfilling fantasies in games. That's what we do. Like we invent new fantasies sometimes for that you didn't even realize you had. It's like, oh, the sword, it would be perfect if it felt like this, even though sword has never ever felt like that. It's never done that or caught fire when you were in a street or you know, anything, or starts sparkling when it's rare or that kind of thing. But when it's a fantasy about how you interact with people and how people interact with you, it gets a lot more blurry about how much you should cater to what the player really craves and really wants right now versus how much you're just enabling a toxic worldview and maybe even encouraging problematic behavior in real life, because the blurring, it can be more unclear whether this dating behavior is a fantasy or it is realistic versus the sword. You know, if someone misunderstands how a sword works or how the boat works or whatever, that's fine. But if they misunderstand how people work, I, as a game designer, feel somewhat guilty there, even though I do have to deliver on a fantasy. It's just a matter of picking out which fantastic elements are acceptable to me ethically.
Right. I mean, that's actually a really good point. I remember a couple years ago. I mean, I this is gonna sound maybe a little bit rudimentary almost, but finally started playing The Witcher 3, and that was like, because I don't play a lot of AAA games or like any really. So like going to Witcher 3, I was like, my mind was blown. It was like, whoa, this world, like people are talking to me. There's voice acting. Wow. And it was just such a like power trip, you know, like the first like 5 to 10 hours, you just feel like God. You're just like, oh yeah, every woman I talk to just wants to strip naked right there and do it with me right now. And it like if I really rode that high for like a good 5 to 10 hours, and then I was just like, this is really weird, right? Like this is like, it makes no sense. I've never felt like this anywhere else in life, in anything else I've done, and it's so unrealistic. So then I got into this huge existential crisis, where like for the next like month or two, I actually had like pretty severe, like I went into this spiral. Like I started like just went to this slump where I was realizing that, you know, like this is what the world wants. Like people want these very fantastical, unrealistic, escapist type of mindset. And And it's a sign that the world is unable to deliver that to people, yet these people are making these experiences as almost a solution, right, to what they cannot get in the real world. So it's very misleading. It kind of further propagates the problem. But then another problem is the people who are trying to do better, the people who are actually trying to write real narratives about relationships and romance, well, you're never going to be able to compete with that, right? Like you're just always operating at a disadvantage because whatever you do is never going to satisfy the fantasy of what Witcher is able to do. And that's hard. And like that's kind of like what I went through.
Yeah, like the classic difficulty because one of the things I think was coined by Georgina Bensley from Hanako Games is the idea of romance as being a vending machine, right? Like you give the gift or you give attention or resources of some kind to a character and they give you love back. And that's a very problematic relationship in real life. And she's proposed a few other types of interactions which are awesome, like the rivalry interaction that sitcoms often use, which sitcoms have their own problems, but still rivalry is somewhat healthier than token vending machine. But what I keep coming back to is the difficulty where, if I put in all this effort and I give resources and I give it to someone and they dislike me as a result, which can happen in real life. In real life, if you get someone a weird gift or you give it to them at a weird time or, they just don't like your face, like there can be various reasons, but like just giving a gift to someone doesn't mean they like you. But in a game, in a fictional game that I know other humans have made for me, I need that gift to have a positive response. Like I can't enjoy this game unless it's like supposed to be like a realistic like experience. If it's supposed to be a fantastical RPG, because I was initially writing my characters like very realistic, and that's definitely one of those like really clear microcosms of like this will always be a little bit problematic if it's satisfying, and it's sort of unresolvable.
Yeah. Speaking about the gifts, I keep going back to Persona because I think it's like the best and worst defender when it comes to this because you're playing as a high school teenage male and games appeals to them a lot. So when you give the wrong gift to somebody, like either the lights will go up or whatever, or they'll give you a response where nothing happened. In real life, like you said, a person will be like, thank you. And I'm like, all right, I won't get text for like a couple of days. That's cool. That's just real life. But in the game, it's just like, oh, okay, I really don't like this, but then everything is fine. And that disconnect is very weird because in real life, you can honestly like give your partner, I don't know, a necklace or roses or what have you. And they may not just be feeling it because they're people. They're like, thanks.
Well, I think
but like in the game, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that this also just kind of portrays that there's like that relationships are linear, right? Like you do this and it just gets better and better and better, or they like you more. And like that's not how relationships work, Anybody who's been in, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a family thing, like anybody who's been in a long-term relationship, there's ups and downs, something that made somebody happy 5 years ago, they might have a different response to today. So when you have this system that works to where, okay, X always equals Y and it always progresses like this, you're completely abandoning any sort of like real personality there, real relationship there.
And I think the word that you use there is very insightful, progress, because I think, especially for those of us working in like the RPG space, progress is kind of this constant need or hunger that is very satisfying. And the only way to get that feeling of progression is to have high transparency, where the player knows I'm getting +1 points to this, I'm getting +5 points to that, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. And so I feel like even in a very complicated person romance simulator, it would still end up feeling super weird to be like, you got +1 to friendship and +3 to romance and +2 to mood and +15 to long-term potential, or
yeah.
like in some ways it gets more weird because it's like, oh, this really is just a computer that I'm dating. I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually
transparency is I guess what I'm trying to say is like the progression transparency is really hard.
Right, a game that we launched a couple years ago, called Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. During the development process,
Yeah.
yeah, it's during the development process, that was actually a huge conversation. I mean, you don't think about romance when you look at that game, but a core component of the game is that like you meet these travelers and then you share stories with each other. Um, and I remember, so in the beginning of the game's design, it was actually designed to be you just tell stories and then they eventually hear stories and then they show their true forms and that's it. There's really no gaming really of any form. But we wanted to make it a little bit more complex than that. And it is a story all about like performance. It's all about narrative and writing, and literal text of the game is kind of the point. That if we gamified it and added stats, it kind of defeats the whole purpose. So what we try to do, whether or not it succeeded is up to the beholder. But we added all these like invisible stats essentially. Like when someone sits there, it's like tell me a funny story. Like based on what you know about that person, maybe they're categorized as someone who likes sad stories anyway, but a slightly funnier sad story is what they're actually looking for. And then eventually you kind of do, like you figure out what someone wants by telling them stories and them giving you that feedback. Personally, I think it works pretty well. I don't think most people really caught on to what actually happens in the game. But that was kind of our solution to it, and I would really hope to explore that system or something similar to that, further down the road.
Yeah, I think my favorite in-between space for that kind of character transparency, where some of it is, almost all of it is opaque, but you just get these little hints of like something is changing, almost like she will remember this kind of stuff, is in 80 Days, which I think is a brilliantly designed game. You get these very clear, like, okay, this person's mood is now feisty or something like that. And you're still not sure what that means exactly, but at least the game is telling you that something is changing. If anyone hasn't played 80 Days, I mean, it's not very romantic, but I really like the relationship between, because you play as the steward Passepartout, and you're stewarding your master around the world, and it's a lovely game.
I think that I'm trying to think of like subtle mechanics that I've encountered now to kind of show this, and the one that came to mind is actually Harvest Moon / Stardew Valley, because it uses the same thing where you have like the hearts that change colors depending upon like where you are in the relationship. And I don't know, it's hard because as game designers, like you guys have talked about, you want there to be like that feedback, right? Like that response, that progress. And so I mean, I remember with Harvest Moon just like walking up to characters and like you just like, I know like Karen always likes daffodils. She's really easy to romance, especially because you start in the spring, daffodils are everywhere. So I would just pick up 2 daffodils, go to her every single day, like, here you go, flower, flower, walk away, flower, and just do that over and over again until the heart started changing colors, and I don't know, it's like, it's good because I feel like that's more subtle. You don't really see the inner workings there and like the stats that you're getting and stuff, but at the same time it's like it becomes mindless, right? Like you're just like me already,
Yeah, the classic vending machine, right? Like, if I just put in daffodils, then she'll fall in love and we'll get married. But maybe it's so abstract, like nobody can think that they're just going to give someone 300 daffodils, right? Like that's not something somebody takes away, I hope.
I mean, we say that, but like we've seen that like the incel community exists. So like there are people who do think that like you can exchange a person for like goods in emotional ways. And that's part of the problem too. And it comes down to other things too. Like I feel like BioWare gets a lot of props for their romances because they're actual characters, and like they had a lot of queer romances at first, like less so in Mass Effect, but especially for queer men. But you had Liliana, and then in Dragon Age 2, everyone was bi, which I also kind of have an issue with, just because like a lot of the problem with romance in games too is that like there's this inherent assumption that the player character is like irresistible to everyone, and that like everybody wants to bang them, and it's just like simply not true. And like that's part of the biggest thing with the gamer power fantasy, right? Is like not only do you have the kick-ass sword and the cool body and the armor that you picked out, but like anybody that you want to bang wants to bang you back, and it's like that's not how that works at all. And so like having these, and like it sucks because on the one hand, like Dragon Age 2 for example, they have all these really strong interesting characters, but part of that agency gets taken away from them because none of them, for the most part, except for Varric, are like, no, I'm good actually. Like everybody wants to date Hawk.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
remember.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I remember with Dragon Age Inquisition, that was one of the first times in a game I realized when I was playing it that I had ever been told no, because like I liked Dorian a little bit. I was like, Dorian's kind of cute, but I was playing as a girl and Dorian's gay, and I was kind of doing flirty options, and he's just kind of like, I'll flirt back, but I like guys, you know? And I was like, oh, that's like the first time that's happened. And like, it wasn't like, I wasn't like mad about it or anything, but I was just like, you don't encounter that in games. Normally it's like, oh, well, you want that person, fine, you can have them.
Yeah, there's an instance of that in Mass Effect 2, which because like if you talk to Morden too much, he's like, could you back off? And it's like, on the one hand, I like that, but on the other hand, it's like, why is it like, if I continuously have a conversation with that person, does that mean that like I have to have romantic intentions?
Yeah.
Like, what if my shepherd just wanted to be pals with the war criminal? Like, that should be fine.
I wanted to kind of reel it back to the power kind of fantasy that you have in games, especially Jess, you brought up something that kind of just like popped in like my head. When you said like Karen is like an easy character to romance, I think that sort of bleeds into real life. I think it's safe to say that a lot of the bad gamers, so to say, don't really like to work, and it's a real issue. I know there were things that I've seen online recently, especially with things that are shared and kind of like our groups that I'm in. The issue with these kind of like gaming romances is because they kind of push the narrative of like, you can act like this with the real person. There are recent things that were just like, oh, like I forget that like real women aren't anime women. I've also been kind of involved with like someone giving those gifts, which I think Jeffrey, you pointed out earlier, and it's a real issue. And I think it just kind of bleeds into everything, like also like with the sex scenes in the games. I never enjoy them. They all look like straight porn. I don't like it. It's not fun. But no, I just needed to say that once Jess said that, I'm just like, oh, I'm angry.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Like, because it leans into it, you know, as much as people want to kind of say, oh, it's just a game, whatever, like it's not, you know, perpetuating anything. It does. It creates that sort of entitlement that we see, especially in a lot of male gamers. It's the reason why you have people who go into girls' Twitch channels and give them money and give them bits and sub to them, and then they expect something from it, you know? And it's like, no, you're just here because you're enjoying the content somebody's making, or you enjoy their personality or whatever. You're not entitled to this girl's time or her favor or her attention.
Also, like, yeah, or like even if you're just there for the titties, like you can pay for it. It doesn't owe you anything back.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's frustrating because, you know, and like I just wrote this piece on Persona 5, right? And like one of the things that I talked about, one of the things that I talked about is how I thought it was problematic that you could date 35-year-old women, you know, like a doctor and a teacher, women who are in direct power over you, especially when the game starts off with the first villain being a teacher who's taking advantage of females at the school. It just isn't really coherent. It doesn't really fit, especially the whole game is about the abuse of power, and two of those relationships are an abuse of power, straight up. And I think that it's something to where people are so resistant because they love the game, and it's immediately, well, like you don't love this game because why would you talk shit about this if you love this game? I do love this game, but at the same time, you know, I can step back, I can be critical of the relationships, and it's reliant. You have to have a sort of like media literacy, right, to like kind of analyze this thing and be like, this is what it's saying, but is this right in real life? And you can't say everything about this game is good, everything's 100%, everything's pure, when you know there's a fantasy element to it, when you know this is something that's not good in real life. Like, you have to be able to distinguish between the two. You have to be able to love things and be critical of things.
Right. I mean, comparing video games to real life, just you know, quickly on that kind of topic about power fantasies. One of the things that I personally feel like is odd, I guess, really weird, is the fact that, you know, like sex in real life or sexual relationships or just romantic relationships in real life there's a lot of components. There's a lot of complexities to it, right? Like it's awkward, it's silly, it's hilarious sometimes. You know, like when you're having that very intimate connection with a real human being, there's just a whole wide range of emotions. It's not just hey, what's up, baby? You know, like and the
Yeah.
whip your dick out kind of like type of like that that actually never happens in real life. Yet like no one for some reason you know, with or without a relationship in their life, no game developer or publisher or whatever really focuses on these other aspects of romantic relationships. That to me is confusing. Like I don't know why that is, because as you know, just like coming, just thinking about my life, like, you know, the way that I have grown up and matured and started understanding the various dimensions of romance. I would have loved that. I would have loved to have that connection and learned a little bit more and peeked under the curtain, so to speak, about what a real relationship is. I was just never given the opportunity to explore it.
Yeah, because it makes
Yeah, I'm
you.
told.
Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm told that Cybele, it won an IGF award a few years ago. I'm told that's a really interesting depiction of a relationship.
Is that the
But
Christine Love one?
no, it's by Nina
Nina
Freeman.
Freeman, yeah.
Yeah,
Freeman, yeah.
Oh,
and
that's okay. That's the Warcraft inspired one, right? Or am I thinking of something else? The one that's like
yeah,
MMO?
basically MMO,
Yeah.
fake MMO. Yeah,
Yeah.
story.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I never played Emily as a way, but I think there might have been some flirting relationship aspects in there. But yeah, I don't know. I'm looking. I hope there's more like that, because I think the best way to approach that is kind of a personal, maybe not autobiographical, but really like this is a relationship between two people. Because when it gets to that complexity, like you can't make it about more than these two people. You can't make it about a silent protagonist and 15 fantasy boyfriends. Like it's not gonna work that way. It has to be like, you know, every relationship's so different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think. Ooh, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Oh, I am so sorry. I wanted to actually piggyback off that. And that's the thing that makes all of this very, very weird. If you have a silent protagonist and you have these quote unquote, you know, potential love interests or what have you. So it's like when you really step back, this dude is saying absolutely nothing, but you're literally a pickup line artist, right? And we all know that is horrible. You're just saying the right things and you're getting rewarded for it. It doesn't work like that in real life. Like I can even tell you from firsthand experiences, like people who like you can literally say the wrong thing. You have no idea what's going on, and you're like, okay, but as an adult, you realize you probably said something. It probably has nothing to do with you, and you just move on. That's how it works. And another thing I wanted to add too is that it was mentioned earlier. Why don't we just have romances where you're just hanging out with your partner, or you're just watching a movie? Nothing has to lead to sex. Matter of fact, for a lot of people, that's what romance is, right? You're just doing something mundane together, but that's not rewarded. We always have to get like, okay, we're together, we're dating, and it's that weird feedback loop that games give us, right? Like we always have to get the ultimate goal. And I remember Persona specifically. I don't know if it was the producer or director that said it, but he said something along the lines of, "I don't have female friendships," and that really stuck in my head because it's like clearly playing your games. I can see that because it's not built in where like there's this really cool person who's a woman. I just want to be her friend because she offers me perspectives about things that me as a guy I don't understand, or you're teaching me how to play chess. But no, you can romance everybody.
Well, and it makes it so awkward too, because like I even remember playing Persona 4 Golden, right? Like there are multiple characters in that game that like the women that I really liked. Like I ended up going with Yukiko, but like Chie is really cool, you know, like she has like that cool tomboy, you know, thing about her, and like I just wanted to be her friend. And you also have Rise, and I love Rise too, you know. She's you know, kind of a more like complicated and dynamic character, and I really love her. And so it got to the point like you, because there's a moment when each one of these women like, you know, wants to be something more, and then you're put in the position of being like, do I want to be the bad guy who has all of these women yelling at me on Valentine's Day when things get awkward, or do I want to reject each one of these people? And like ultimately, like I rejected people, but and you know, I guess maybe there's a lesson in itself there, right? But at the same time, it's like I wish that there could have just been like friendships with these people too. You know, it's you know, because they'll even do it when you're in a relationship too. Like it doesn't stop them. Like you'll be in a relationship with a character already, and then all of these people will still proposition.
Yeah, well, and it's frustrating because a lot of games like will let you cheat or whatever, but like very few like leave options for like different relationship dynamics.
Yeah.
Like I think the only game I personally have any experience with or have seen anything about is Lunaris Games, their new one that's coming out that I'm spacing the name of right now. But it's like medieval fantasy, and they let you be like poly. There are like certain romance options that are poly. But I think that's the only one I can even think of that like offers that as an option.
And I just thought of this too, actually. This popped into my head as soon as so Persona 4 Golden, I couldn't, I felt too bad rejecting Rise. I didn't reject Rise. So on Valentine's Day, right, or whatever, she comes around, I'm still with Yukiko, and then you basically get to a point where you're gaslighting these women. Like they're just like, I feel like there's something off here, and you're just like, no, like you're like you don't have any other option. You can't really, like, you have to tell her she's crazy and that she's just imagining things. And then I reached that point and I felt horrible. And it's like, okay, well, this is where people pick this up, is like you get caught, you know, in a relationship with two women, and it's like, no, you're crazy. Like, of course it's only you, of course. You know, and like that's what I'm sitting here telling this girl. And I'm like, man, if somebody did this to one of my friends in real life, you know.
Slash studio head, I gotta say, I do think that there is a market that's being unexplored here, in the cozy romantic hangout that's non-sexual, because I feel like when those scenes have been executed well in other games, like whether it's Nathan Drake or even one of the earliest ones was, I think, The Darkness. So like everybody went nuts for the scene where you're watching TV on the couch with your girlfriend's legs on your lap, and it's kind of up to you when you end the scene. But it was just like this depiction of this mundane romance was so powerful, and it's still so rare that I hope more people explore it, because it has a really unique beauty.
But yeah, no, I mean, that's something that I would like to see more of for sure. Cause yeah, I mean, the moment with, you know, Nate Drake and Elena is really cute. And I feel like it just normalizes the idea that like relationships are not all passion and sex and like, you know, and that's the thing in these BioWare games, right? Is like every moment is like, we might die at any time, you know, like hold me, you know, like that's how it is. And so, it's always high stakes. It's always very passionate. And you can still have a very passionate relationship without it looking like that. It makes it seem more normal and more attainable. And if you see the ups and downs, if you see like the moments where you wake up and neither one of you is, you know, looking super hot, and you just throw on some TV and make coffee, like, you know, like that's life. And it'd be nice to see that more.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, you pretty much described a lot of what Serenity Forge is currently doing. I mean, Half Past Fate, the most explicit scene there was, well, two queer women hugging, cuddling on the rooftop, and there was a kiss at the end of the game. That was it. That's the whole thing. But it's an entirely romantic game. Our new game that we're announcing, Date Night Bowling, is a bowling game, like traditional super bowling type of game, but it's actually a dating sim, and there's a lot of WarioWare type of bonding action that happens in the game. But that's like, it's all about the silliness, right? Like, oh, let me go grab your bowling shoes. What size are you? It's like, well, now you have to guess. You know, like these types of interactions they're cute, they're funny, they're awkward, but that's what real romance is. It's a way more closer allegory towards what we as humans define ourselves to be in a relationship, compared to something that is more often depicted in, you know, hentai or porn or whatever it is that's on Steam nowadays, coming out every day.
Yeah. Well, and I guess like where I kind of want to wrap this up then is just with that question to everybody is like, you know, we talked about how we want to see like cozier romances, things like that. Like what are things we can do mechanically or within the game's narrative to make things different and you think would improve the games that we're seeing in relationships?
Jess, can I read a listener question that ties into this?
Yeah, for sure.
Audience question. So, oh god, I'm on the wrong Twitter account. I'm sorry. So Bryden Kex, shout out to Bryden. He's from Evolve PR and he rules. He asked, would you have advice for developers who want to include player choice in romantic narratives while avoiding a power fantasy dynamic? Which I feel like we've talked about a lot already, but I
Yeah.
figured like, yeah, kind of ties in.
Yeah. So just like, I guess, you know, for right now, like as we close out like our goals for the future, things that we want to see.
Oh, Tanya, you're muted.
Yeah. So I can just really quick say a couple of relatively easy duct tapes that I've done for Boyfriend Engine to make it, in my opinion, less problematic, despite the fact that it is very clearly fantasy fulfillment. So all of the weapons explicitly give you permission to date other people, so you're not cheating on anybody. Second, you can absolutely be friends with them, and they do see if you're interested, but like that doesn't stop you from getting closer. If you're not into a romance with them, then that's cool. You can still like get to know their deepest selves platonically. A lot of the other, I'd love to hear other attainable ideas for relationship depictions, but I would say there's still problematic mechanics in there that I'm hoping people will accept as fantasy, but maybe for the next game we'll innovate a little bit harder.
Well, and I think that's a thing to address too, is like I feel like the second that you say like this thing is problematic, people are quick to be like purity police, like you want all games to be like squeaky clean, no bad moral messages. And I think that there's it's the thing that I said earlier, right? About like, you know, being able to love something and also be critical of it. I can admit that a lot of things that I like are problematic, or like, oh, this TV show I love is totally trashy, but it's great. And I think that we just have to be able to admit that with all things, right? And like to be able to look at things critically and say, this works here, I get this. In real life, not so much. Like it's okay to differentiate.
Yeah, like when I look at player choice in video games, a lot of times I think when we talk about romance in video games, we talk about first player choice. You know, you talk about what you are choosing with the people around you. One of the games I actually do want to bring up is Fire Emblem, the Fire Emblem series, where there's a lot of matchmaking, there's a lot of player choice again. The IP itself has many, many issues in how they deal with romance. You can Google it, it's pretty obvious. People talk about it often. But one of the things I do want to point out is that it is actually pretty fresh take on how romance is handled in a video game, where you are not the protagonist. You're not the one going around dating everybody and having this power fantasy, whereas now you're kind of thinking about the people around you and how people could get matched up. I mean, who hasn't played matchmaker in their lives with their friends, right? Like to some degree, jokingly or not. But ultimately, it is that type of like player choice that I think could be explored further. Again, like I said, Fire Emblem series problems all around. I'm not saying that it was a good example by any means, but I do think that, you know, that is a closer representation of something more like a modern day sitcom or a modern day rom-com film, where, you know, you're seeing more of a real relationship once the kind of the first person perspective gets removed. You're now taught a more authentic experience to some degree, and maybe there's something there that we could explore as an industry down the road.
No, I totally agree. There's been plenty of games where like I ship secondary characters, you know, and nothing ever happens with, like, going back to Persona again, An and Ryuji and stuff. Like I totally saw them like being a couple because I thought, oh, she'd be good for him, and I feel like he'd be, you know what I mean? Like
it's a bimbo and a himbo. They're perfect.
You know,
they're
like,
made for each other.
I love the idea of them getting together, but that never happens. And An is immediately just, she has to default be attracted to the main character, and so it's kind of a bummer.
I wanted to add, as a player and not a dev, I think something that really helped me with romance in games is kind of things being spelled out for me. We can talk about how, you know, we can say that things are obviously wrong. And I see a lot, especially with just his recent piece and just kind of like being in the gaming space for so long. Things really, people get it so close. They get it so darn close, especially with like the maturity in relationships when it's a teenage person and like their teacher or their doctor, and like stuff that you see in games. You see comments like, oh, well, if I was young, like if someone older came up to me, like I wouldn't like give that up. And that's like a real issue. They don't see that that's an issue because they grow up with that. As a teenager, you know, being young, I also didn't see a problem with it. Now I definitely do. But something that kind of showed me that that was a real issue is kind of playing some of the Shin Megami Tensei games. And also, surprisingly enough, I'm a baby. I was still in high school in 2014, and I played Hatoful Boyfriend. And you can't romance the teacher pigeon at all. They spell it out for you that it is wrong. You should not do this. He is just there to be your teacher, and that's all it is. Um, and I think I would like to see that more in games. As much as we can put all these complexities in it, unless you say like, "Hey, this is wrong," people won't get it. You can't be nice about it.
Well, it's like, yeah, how much cooler would it have been in Persona 5 if you did develop feelings for your teacher and you approached her and you said, hey, like, you know, like there was that conversation and she was the adult who was responsible enough to be like, I get that you have these feelings. These feelings are normal. Like, you know, but, you know, this is the situation.
But I'm
like,
a fucking
yeah,
adult.
exactly. You know, it's like,
That's honestly what I expected to happen.
Yeah.
Like, I was so shocked that that's not what happened.
yeah.
Well, then the doctor one's even worse because she does medical experiments on him in addition.
It's a whole thing. Yeah.
These people are almost getting when they comment things like, "Oh, well, like that's sexy. That's a fantasy." It's just like, yeah, it's a fantasy. It shouldn't be happening. But yeah, I'm gonna stop before I keep going on it. I can make a presentation about this.
And I think honestly that does us for time anyway. So we'll go ahead and we'll get the goodbyes taken care of where everybody can find you. So I will just start with you, Ty. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at ty_GN8art.
Perfect. And Monty, how about you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at friedmonty.
Awesome. Jeffrey, how about yourself?
You can find me on Twitter at jrpotential.
And Tanya?
I recommend you follow the Kitfox Games Twitter and join our Kitfox Games Discord. You can also find me on Twitter if you're a detective, but I'll leave that to you.
And Z, how about you?
Yeah, that's Serenity Forge. Twitter is probably the best, at Serenity Forge. We also have a Discord, Facebook, if you still use that, if you're old like me, I guess. And lastly, you can track me down on Twitter. It's hard to spell, ZhenGhuaYang.
Perfect. And I am Jessica Howard, and you can find me at JustJessIsFine on Twitter. Remember, if you are interested in the games that our lovely devs have talked about on this, I was gonna say podcast, but this is a panel, then wishlist them on Steam, because it helps out. And I can vouch for the demo I played of Boyfriend Dungeon and Half Past Fate. Awesome games. And I'm excited for what's to come. So yeah, do it. Wishlist. And thank you all so much for listening. This has been such a cool experience, and I hope the rest of PAX is going well for you guys. And we will see you, I'm sure, next year, hopefully in person. Who knows?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for coming on.